Good evening and welcome members, friends, and distinguished guests to the 62nd annual meeting of the Providence Preservation Society. I am Chris Marcella, Board President of PPS. This has been an incredible year for the organization, and we're excited to celebrate with all of you, our supporters, friends, and advocates. I'd like to give a special welcome this evening to Councilman Salvatore, Councilwoman LaFortune, and former Councilman Zurier. Thank you for coming. Tonight, we're pleased to have Councilwoman Nerva LaFortune from Providence's Ward 3 on the east side with us to open the meeting. Councilwoman LaFortune is the first Haitian American to hold elected office in the state of Rhode Island and served as the Vice Chair of the Special Committee on Education during the last term. She has championed affordable housing, support for minority and women-owned businesses, community development, and increased transparency and community engagement in municipal affairs. She was a vocal opponent of the Hope Point Tower and is an advocate for Providence's public schools and historic school buildings. Councilwoman LaFortune.
I'm already tall, and now I'm even more taller, which is not a bad thing. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Brent. And I'm happy to see former Councilman Zurier, as well as my colleague, Councilman David Salvatore here, the board of the Preservation Society, and all the supporters. Thank you for being here this evening. So one of the things, before I start, one of the things that Brent and I have been talking about is our public school buildings, and trying to preserve our public school buildings. And we all know the climate of our educational system, the academic climate and the conditions that they're in academically, but our schools' buildings are also part of the problem. In 1800, Rhode Island's General Assembly passed an act to establish free schools, a bill that ordered each town to open public schools. Most towns struggled to do it, but Providence managed to open elementary schools. However, for decades, Rhode Island had no public high school. By 1838, a debate erupted over the education system, and there was a push to further educate children. And on March 20th, 1843, Providence dedicated Classical High School. The school, which at first was integrated, admitted women and African Americans. In the fall of 1931, the city borrowed $300,000 in anticipation of taxes for a system of work relief, supplemented by loans from the state and then by the federal New Deal programs. 5 new junior high schools, including Mount Pleasant High School, were among the many public works projects undertaken in Providence during the Great Depression, an era as an attempt to combat unemployment. The Hope Street High School, which what it was called, completed in June 1936, is one of the largest high schools in America. One of the largest high schools in America is right here in our little town, Providence. It accommodates about over 2,000 students with an auditorium that can seat over 1,000 people. It has one of the most magnificent stages. It was built to be fireproof with beautiful bronze doors. These particular schools were built during a time where our educational system was segregated. Our country was experiencing poverty, segregation, and these schools were built as a method to advance our young people so that they could have an education beyond elementary school. But yet, for many years, we have failed to support and take care of these buildings. We know that we need to invest in curriculum, in our students, and in our teachers, but there's also a strong correlation between buildings and academic achievement. How many students can learn when the ceiling is leaking, or they can't use the restroom because the toilets don't work, or they have an auditorium that is You have to see the Hope High School auditorium. It is so beautiful. It is a professional auditorium. There are certain theaters in New York City that don't have an auditorium or a theater with the capacity that Hope High School's auditorium has. And yet, a school that once had an arts and theaters program, students cannot even use the space. Because again, the ceiling is crumbling. The stage is unsafe. We have to do more. Our schools are part of the makeshift of our society. And if we're not investing in our buildings, we're not investing in our students. And these buildings, some of them, are historical entities within our community. And so as you all think about how to preserve our historical buildings and our historical spaces, I hope that you don't forget our schools, our public educational buildings. These buildings serve students from diverse backgrounds, individuals who don't have an opportunity to pursue a private education because they don't have the resources to pay $30,000 or more. These schools have produced judges, have produced lawyers, have produced doctors, have produced a city council person, me. These schools house teachers. Despite what people say, there are some teachers who are truly dedicated to our kids. And every day you go in some of these buildings, you see the work that's being done just to preserve the space. One side, there might be deteriorating walls, and you'll see students who have painted artwork. You might go into a classroom where the window can no longer open. But kids are there, they're learning, they're attempting to thrive. But we have to invest in our buildings. We have to preserve these spaces. Think about what we can do in a space like Hope High School. We can bring in some of the best performances in the world. Our students can have access to theater and dance and art teachers that come from Brown or RISD. But if we don't have the space to do it, how can we provide those opportunities? So please, I ask all of you to think about our school buildings. What's inside those skilled buildings? Theaters, libraries like the one at Mount Pleasant High School. Buildings that now sit empty, like the old Flynn School, or Windmill School, pardon. Think about those buildings. And I hope that all of you can work with me and some other leaders in trying to restore our schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. PPS thanks you, and the community thanks you. Now I would like to thank our sponsors, shown on the screen, especially our partner in preservation sponsor, the Foundry Associates. Special thanks to Grace Episcopal Church, a 2019 Preservation Award winner, for hosting us tonight. While the Holy Trinity is well known, Grace is perhaps unique in representing the Holy Trinity of American ecclesiastical architecture, with the original 1845 design by Richard Upjohn, a 1912 addition by Ralph Adams Cram, and a suspected sustained glass window by John Lafarge. Divine providence, indeed. With that, I call to order the 62nd annual meeting of the Providence Preservation Society. Our first order of business is a report on the financial well-being of the Society, which will be delivered by PPS Treasurer Laura Bowerman.
Good evening. I am delighted to be here tonight to let you know that in 2019, Providence Preservation Society had a solid, very good financial performance. We ended the year with $3.5 million in assets, of which almost $1.8 million is in investments. And our annual operating budget of about $700,000 is essentially break even. In keeping with all of the work that is done behind the scenes, I'd like to thank Ken Garapi, our bookkeeper, who keeps the Finance Committee in business, and our financial accountants, Mullen, Scorpio, and Cirilli, who provides unqualified audited financial statements to us. So we are able to leverage those financial statements with donors who would give us grants and major gifts. It's important to have that quality, that legitimacy, to have unqualified audited financial statements. And I'd like to read our major donors last year. They are 1772 Foundation, Bathlin Foundation, Champlin Foundation, Felicia Fund, the Herman Rose Civic, Cultural, and Media Access Fund, June Rockwell Levy Foundation, National Trust for Historic Preservation, Providence Tourism Council, Rhode Island Historical Preservation and Heritage Commission, and the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts. Thank you, if any of you are here today. Another important aspect of our finances is our Providence partners in preservation. They are 27 corporations that provide annual funds to PPS. This year we obtained 3 new organizations. They are LLB Architects, Shawmut Construction, and the Telephone Building. And we thank you very much. And there should be a slide listing all of those 27 entities. And there they are. Excellent. It's important for you to know that 100% of the board participates in providing funds for the organization. And we also had a very successful annual giving campaign where we raised $146,000. We had 240 individual donors, and many people increased this year's 2019 gifts over 2018 gifts. So there was an anonymous match of $15,000, which we were able to obtain. We also have membership of 518 households, and we increased our membership by 72 this year, and we thank you for that. Membership is really what keeps us chugging along, and if you are not a member, there will be brochures throughout the reception area. We would really appreciate it if you would pick one up and become a member, because our membership in PPS allows us to have a thoughtful and strong voice for preserving Rhode Island and for growing Providence. Thank you. I'd like to...
Thank you, Laurel. At this time, I would like to recognize and thank the 5 PPS trustees rolling off the board. Please stand as I call your name, and Mark will be coming by with a token of our gratitude. J.P. Couture, Jack Renshaw, Lucy Searle, Melissa Trapp, Mark Van Oppen. Thank you all for your contributions to PPS over many, many, many years. We are deeply grateful. Next, we will hear from Rita Danielle Steele, PPS trustee and chair of the Board Governance and Nominating Committee.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Chris. It is my pleasure to present the slate of new trustees for election to a 3-year term commencing tonight. A biography of each nominee is in your program. As I call your name, please stand and remain standing. Barry Fain, Elizabeth Warburton Rochefort, and Shida Shafi. Thank you for agreeing to serve as trustees of the Providence Preservation Society. We look forward to working with you. I now present for your consideration the slate of officers for 2020. As I call your name, please stand and remain standing. Continuing as president for his 3rd and final year, Christopher J. Marcella. Each of the following is nominated for a one-year term for Vice President: Warren Jagger, Rita Danielle Steele, and Kate Swanson. For Treasurer, Laurel Bowerman. And for Secretary, Carrie Zaslow. Thank you. You may be seated. Mr. President, on behalf of the Board of Trustees, I move that the 2020 slate of officers and new trustees be approved.
Thank you, Rita. May I have a second? Second. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries with the majority of members present voting in the affirmative. Thank you. I would like to officially welcome our new PPS trustees and thank our returning trustees. Thank you for all your continued commitment to this organization. This concludes the business of the annual meeting of the Providence Preservation Society. This is the shortest meeting we've ever had. At this time, I invite our esteemed Executive Director, Brent Runyon, to the stage as we look back at key moments of 2019.
Thank you, Chris. Good evening, everyone. It's great to see you. Just starting my 7th year here, so I think I'm only second in tenure to Wendy Nicholas. So I've got 5 more to catch up. Wish me luck. Thanks. It's a real pleasure to serve the organization. We have a lot of fun, and as anyone on staff will tell you, especially some of our newer staff, it is incredibly busy. But we have a good time, and a lot of that is due to the people we work with. I have an incredible staff. We have a really engaged and supportive board of trustees. As you just heard, a very large number of members who are really enthusiastic, and a huge supportive community beyond that. The staff that I mentioned are all here tonight. I hope you'll say hello. You probably know them already: Angela, Kate, Rachel, and Mark. And then we have a new staff member who just joined us about 6 months ago, Kelsey Mullen, who's running the computer here. So please say hello. Please say hello to her tonight. She has jumped right into the Providence community and is a great asset to PPS already. She has more skills than this, I can tell you. The work we do, the work we've accomplished last year is all towards our mission of promoting and advocating and collaborating to further the mission to preserve Providence through historic preservation and the enhancement of the city's unique character. Advocacy takes many forms, as you may know. I'll talk about a few of them, and throughout the evening you'll hear others talk about them as well. But in the last several years, we've been involved in federal advocacy, going to Capitol Hill in March to lobby our delegation and others in federal tax credit legislation and other things. And also back home, promoting Rhode Island's most endangered historic places like the Industrial Trust Building. One of the most memorable events of the last year was a press conference we hosted last May, which is Historic Preservation Month. We had that down in Kennedy Plaza so we could have a good view of what was named by the National Trust one of America's 11 most endangered places. We were joined by students, as you can see in the picture, from Charette High School, a charter school for urban planning and historic preservation located in downtown Providence, the first such school of its kind in the country, right here in Providence. And we're looking forward to working with them to give them even more exposure to historic preservation and planning as they develop their curriculum. For many years, we've worked with artists to illuminate and interpret many historic places, the stories that they tell and the stories that haven't been told. And last year, we worked with artists on 4 historic sites that were on our 2018 Most Endangered Properties List: Knight Memorial Library, Broad Street Synagogue, Paragon Mill, and Parcel 1A on the Providence Riverfront, one of the parcels that, where you may know it as Buddy Cianci's helipad site. So, just to give you a little orientation. That project was really exciting. It enabled local artists and scholars to engage with community members, provoking conversations about the meaning of place, what happens when a site tells more than one story, and what kind of reparative work can ensue when some narratives have been erased in favor of others. As you can see by the images, The walking tours, talks, and performances were attended by hundreds of people. We then digitized much of the work, and we incorporated it into our new online guide to Providence architecture, which you'll be hearing more about as the year goes on. As I mentioned earlier, during various points in the program, you'll be hearing about features of our advocacy work last year. So this time, I briefly want to mention to you how we prioritize that cornerstone of our mission. First, we strive to have constant and committed engagement with the city's neighborhood associations, institutions like Brown, RISD, and others, developers, builders, and really anyone who's affecting the built environment around us. Second, we are a constant presence at most city and state commissions that oversee approvals for building projects. And finally, our Planning and Architectural Review Committee meets monthly to review and advise on preservation and new construction projects. And they have been meeting since the 70s, thanks to our former director, Deborah Dunning, who's here tonight in the red hat. It's a great committee, and it's had a lot of influence on the way the city looks over the last 40 plus years. This slide shows just a few of the projects we advocated for or against in 2019. Another aspect of advocacy is one that we really enjoy, celebration. And we did a lot of celebrating last year. We awarded 16 new historic property markers, some to first-time homeowners, one to a church, and all to people who believe that their historic buildings contribute to a greater sense of place. With more than 1,500 markers throughout the city, this is the most visible, enduring display of how our community values historic preservation. Another celebration was in November. We capped off the year by celebrating the best in historic preservation, design, and planning in our biannual Preservation Awards Gala in one of the city's landmark buildings, the Providence Public Library, where we got a sneak peek of the preservation work happening there. The award winners included the Pavilion at Grace Church, which will be in just a few minutes, the new Waterfire Arts Center, and the Providence River Pedestrian Bridge. The event raised awareness of the high caliber of preservation projects, recent projects in the city. More importantly, raised funds for our ongoing advocacy and education work. So finally, I want to close with an invitation to all of you. One of the most memorable events of any year is our Winter Bash. For nearly 2 decades, we've hosted a fun night that celebrates underutilized or even vacant historic places throughout the city. And last year, we celebrated in a nearly finished space the Bones Theater, which won a Preservation Award, and was, before that, a 5-time endangered property throughout the years. And now it is a fully revitalized event space and commercial space that was renovated by a developer and contractor who lives in the neighborhood. So my invitation is, our 17th Winter Bash is approaching on February 29th, and I hope all of you will have your tickets by now. If not, you can purchase them online anytime. This is another fundraising event that also celebrates the potential in historic places, and what better way to call attention to a nondescript historic building than with an outrageous theme? So I encourage all of you to bring out your jumpsuits, your sequins, your velour for the Studio 54 theme that we're having this year. I'll see you there. But while you're at it, consider saving the date for some other events and excursions that we have planned this year. And Mr. President, that concludes my report on some of the highlights of the Society's activities in 2019. Thank you.
Thank you again, Brent, for leading us through another successful and wildly busy year at PPS. Now I have the pleasure of presenting the President's Award, which honors people who have made indelible contributions to PPS or the broader preservation community. The first award is presented to the recently retired leader of the Champlin Foundation, one of Rhode Island's champions of historic preservation. During his 18 years at the helm, Champlin provided critical funding that helped save many historic buildings throughout Rhode Island. In addition, they gave PPS a major grant that helped us purchase the Old Brick Schoolhouse, our home since 1959, which just turned 250 years old. Thank you, Keith Lang, for your service to our community. Keith? Next, we recognize someone who also recently retired after 42 years of service at the Rhode Island Historical Preservation and Heritage Commission, where he led the state in identifying, protecting, and preserving Rhode Island's built and cultural heritage. They have been a great partner and neighbor to PPS on preservation planning, public policy, and zoning issues, and have provided funding for many of our initiatives. Thank you, Ted Sanderson, for your long service to preservation in Rhode Island. The next award goes to someone with whom I worked closely for many years. He recently retired as well, after 24 years as Executive Director of the Providence Foundation and Downtown Providence Parks Conservancy, a major partner in historic preservation, urban planning, and revitalization. Thank you, Dan Bodwin, for your leadership in the transformation and evolution of downtown Providence. The next awards are presented to 3 individuals who jumped in, some willingly, to co-chair our Power of Preservation Education Capital campaign. Through their leadership of a small but dedicated committee, PPS is poised for a new era of historic preservation education for youth and job skills training for adults. Thank you, Pat Moran, Johnny Chase, and Malcolm Chase for these 2 years of service to the Providence Preservation Society. There are numerous people who do so much for PPS in Providence, and it's a pleasure to recognize 6 of them tonight. Thank you all. Now, I want to welcome Rachel Robinson, the Director of Preservation, to announce the 2020 Most Endangered Properties List.
Thank you, Chris. Our next hymn is number 405, All Things Bright and Beautiful. No, that's not why we're here tonight. It is a pleasure to see all of you and to make this annual announcement. It's funny that this time of year, when Hollywood celebrates award season, we present the annual list of most endangered properties. Not quite the same accolade. However, there are similarities. Each year, some buildings on the list play a leading role in our city skyline, while others are more supporting in character. Though dilapidated and tarnished, and some forgotten, like faces of the silent film era, these properties are all stars in our eyes, and we want to see them shine again. Before I announce the 2020 MEP list, I would like to introduce a success story. A year ago, I stood in front of you and announced that the century-old Beresford Nicholson estate at 288 Blackstone Boulevard was part of the 2019 MEP list. It was under imminent threat of demolition and re-subdivision. Through hours of conversation with the developer, real estate agent, and concerned neighbors, of whom there were many, Brent was able to navigate a compromise, and a new buyer was identified to save the main house, which is now undergoing a long overdue renovation. And now the 2020 MEP list, from which we hope to see future success stories. It comes as no surprise to see the Industrial Trust building. PPS has vowed to keep our beloved Superman building atop the MEP list until a solution is found for this considerable preservation challenge. I can report that since the exciting America's 11th most endangered announcement in May, Brent and I began working behind the scenes with a formidable group of stakeholders, movers, and shakers. We are gathering information about the building's knowns and unknowns and identifying ways that we can help find a new use for the keystone of downtown Providence. While we love exploring cultural landscapes and historical figures, admittedly, I spend most of my time thinking about buildings. I love that a community member nominated the neon Axelrod music sign on Weybosset downtown. This prompted us to consider the significance of advertising vestiges. Is this 70-year-old appendage now part of the architecture? Does it deserve protection? I invite you to mull this over when you are out and about in Providence. The site of this handsome 1921 Georgian Revival Bank, active until last year, occupies a significant slice of historic West End real estate. Its location at the intersection of Westminster and Cranston Streets was the previous site of the fabled Hoyle Tavern, which Rochambeau marched his troops past en route to Yorktown. Misguided development plans at present threaten 6 contiguous parcels under common ownership, starting with the vacant Bank and Annex. We demand better for this prominent gateway and invite you to join us in the fight. Here she is again, the Broad Street Synagogue, one of our most decorated MEPs. Up there with the Cranston Street Armory, which is in progress, and the Masonic Temple, which is now happily the Renaissance Hotel. With dogged determination, we continue to advocate for a new occupant and use for this former place of worship. This next one was another interesting nomination that we could not resist. Last year, the state announced a 2026 demolition plan, and the mayor responded with interest in saving this engineering icon. What to do with the 112-year-old Crook Point Bridge, which has stood abandoned since the year of my birth? Can it or should it be preserved? We believe that an adaptive reuse solution can be found and that mitigates present safety and environmental liability. This great Art Deco gem in Smithville is no stranger to the list. However, 5 years have passed since it was last on the MEP radar. It's transferred from state to private hands and become a canvas for graffiti. Surely there's a higher and better use for this handsome utilitarian building. There's something of a building boom taking place on Westminster Street between Federal Hill and the West End. The person who nominated this building, a modest Palladian-inspired commercial structure, is concerned that development pressure makes this vacant and fire-damaged building more vulnerable. In 2019, we finally celebrated the opening of the award-winning Providence River Pedestrian Bridge, an instant icon and amenity. The bridge will eventually connect 2 riverfront parks. Yet before the public parks have opened, the West Side Park shrank in size by 11%, compliments of the General Assembly, and is threatened to be eclipsed by a proposed tower you might have heard of at Parcel 42. 3 years running, the former Water Supply Board building is listed again. PPS is not giving up on this prominent and stylish Mount Pleasant property. Adapted or not, the city-owned building can easily be reused for another century. And finally, we all know that the city received sobering news last summer with the release of the Johns Hopkins University report on the state of the Providence Public School District. Prompted by a MEP nomination for Hope High School by Councilwoman Nerva LaFortune, and following a site visit with stakeholders, we decided to use the Hope High School auditorium as the poster child for the poor condition of our public school buildings. What was a professional-grade performing arts facility when it opened prior to World War II languishes from deterioration and historical fire damage. Our students deserve better, period. That is a wrap on the 2020 MEP list, 10 more properties and artifacts across Providence that join previous listees in august company. We intend to provide updates and information to you on this list throughout the year, so stay tuned.